right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk about a very controversial topic that really should not be controversial at all. And I hope that the way that I frame this should at least alleviate the controversy. We have what we would call in the Jewish parlance, l'shitasoi. That means according to this person's opinion. And if we want to say, as far as the Torah itself, l'shitaso, how does the Torah view a certain subject? It should not offend anybody, because if you don't believe in the Torah, so then you don't. It shouldn't offend you, right? Because it's not on your radar, right? Like if someone would tell me that this is an opinion from the Hadith, the Quran, or from the Church Fathers, or from the New, what they call the New Testament, whatever else, and it goes against what I believe, that it shouldn't affect me, because, and it shouldn't offend me, because these are not books that I hold to be true. As much as I understand that the people from the other religions do understand it to be true. And so I respect them that they believe that, but it's not in my tradition, these books. And so too, if someone is not from the Torah tradition, they should not be offended by me stating how I understand, and this is, I'll go a little further in saying this is my understanding of it, not really my own personal interpretation. I've heard others, this is how I was taught, but I may be extrapolating a little bit more. And I don't mean to offend anybody. I know it's a very hot button topic, but it's worthwhile, especially it's brought up in this week's Parsha and next week's Parsha, or if the people in Eretz Yisrael, last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha. So it's something that has to do with the time and Leben with the Zeit, like they would say in Lubavitch. I'm not a Lubavitcher, but they say that, I think it was the Balatanya, someone told him, "Daf leben mit der Zeit." You have to live with the times. He says, "Leb dich mit der Zeit. Leb dich mit the Sedra, with the Parshas Acharei." Right? That he said he lives with the times. Living with the times means the weekly Torah portion. And so, both in Acharei Kedoshim, we have the arayos, we have the prohibited marriages, on which really no marriage can exist in most of these cases. Not all of the cases, most of the cases, the Kedushin is not chal. If someone would be married and undergo a marriage ceremony, it's meaningless with people on which there is not a Teifus Kedushin, in which, I don't know, how do you say in English, the sanctity of marriage is not realized in such a relationship. And I was listening, I only caught a little bit of it, but I was listening to Dennis Prager today, and he was talking about this subject. I'm sure he knows it's this week's Parsha. He's a shtickler rabbi of a shul, I think, even if he's not an ordained rabbi, but he runs a shul, right? And Mr. Prager, he said, one of the things that the Torah brought to the world was a level of family values in which prohibited incest. That was a big deal that the Torah introduced that to the world, because the pagan societies sanctified incestuous relationships. A lot of the Egyptian pharaohs were married to their sisters. They saw that to be a means to maintain what they believed to be their sacred bloodlines, and so therefore there was things that to us are totally abhorrent, and yet were totally normal in those times. And so the Torah is really transformative of the world, and the influence that the Torah had on the world, that now even in the pagan cultures, because of the spread of Christianity and Islam, I don't know any pagans who would uphold something so disgusting and evil. And say that is part of their tradition. And their, even I think there's a group called Shatat Natur, I think, or MAAT. I don't know exactly what it stands for. They sometimes call it Egyptian yoga, which is kind of an anachronism, where they do try to have some devotion to the Egyptian deities. I remember I do all kinds of weddings, but I had to draw a line at a certain wedding. It was there was, I believe, I don't know if they were both Jewish or if one was Jewish and one was not, so that's already a deal breaker if one was Jewish and one was not. They asked me to very clandestinely accompany them to, I forgot, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they have an Egyptian, and I think they also wanted me to do it on Shabbos or Yom Tov or something specifically, and they were going to perform some kind of an Egyptian ritual in their wedding ceremony, the devotion to Egyptian gods, in front of these relics from the museum that the Metropolitan Museum of Art had, and that was too much for me. I had to say no. I had to decline for multiple reasons. I've done weddings where the couple were some sort of pagans, and I just pronounced them man and wife, really, and it was totally civil, but and they had some kind of a totem of a two-headed turtle. They were a very strange type of thing, but I wasn't really involved in and I don't think they were worshiping. It was more of a devotion, not a worship. In any event, I had and I didn't even realize until afterwards. They told me, "Oh, this was a pagan ceremony." This is one of the first weddings I did, I think, after we moved here, back to New York. Or that might have been still in Virginia, I don't remember. I think it was somewhere in New Jersey, maybe, so it was after we moved back here, so maybe about 10 years ago. And I didn't realize and they didn't tell me ahead of time. They did something where they each put a pebble inside this box with some turtles and a picture of a two-headed turtle on it, and then they asked I should pronounce them man and wife, and and then they told me, but this one where they asked me to actually go in front of the Egyptian idols, I couldn't do that. It's a much different type of thing. But anyway, the point that I'm bringing out here is that the Torah really transforms society in this way. And there's an idea in the West today of what they call, I forget the term, sexual orientation. And there is no such concept of sexual orientation in the Torah. Not only is there no such thing as a homosexual, there's no such thing as a heterosexual. The Torah recognizes that human beings are naturally depraved, naturally prone to commit the most depraved sins. and that they have to be taught not to do so, and to avoid disgusting abominations. But and part of it, what our sages teach, is to protect, particularly to protect children from abuse. Even though I know a lot of people who are misinformed about what the Talmud teaches, they misinterpret a lot of the teachings to say just the opposite, to say that, God forbid, the Talmud is supporting child abuse, God forbid. But no, it's just the opposite. If you actually read what it says, instead of things taken out of context, it says that we have to protect the children because the effects of this abuse could lead them to develop, bad habits, let's say, but I really believe, though, that it's heretical, this idea that people have a sexual orientation. They could have a preference, perhaps, and that's based on nurture, usually sometimes based on abuse. But naturally, human beings are, I guess, what they would call pansexual. And so that's why the Torah has to, just like the Torah has to tell us not to eat pork, even though there's nothing unnatural about eating pork, the Torah has to tell us that it's a sin to do all these various types of sins. And what the left is trying to brainwash people to think is that somehow you belong to a different, and in a certain sense, this was, in the culture, even though, we know in the ancient pagan cultures, people essentially were what they would call pansexual. That's the way their society was. The ancient Greeks and ancient Romans and so forth, just giving into base desires without, without trying to have a meaning in life with these things, as far as that part of the human condition goes. But this lie that people are what they are and they're stuck like this is what's caused a lot of people to feel that like they can't repent of the sin. If someone, when they change it from behavior to an identity, it makes it very difficult for people to repent if they have fallen in this sin. And we shouldn't treat really one sin any different than any other sin. We shouldn't treat it any differently than violating the Sabbath or whatever else. But also there's a difference we have to recognize between ideology, which could be heretical, and actions that we try our best to overcome temptations, and we do what we can, try to be ethical, try to be moral, and try to be holy. Sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't. But to go and say everything's okay, that you're allowed to do all these things that the Torah tells us you're not allowed to do, that is heretical. It's in a certain way, a person who doesn't do that sin, but believes it's okay, is worse in many ways. If any sin is worse than a person who does the sin but knows it's wrong and is trying to repent, wishes they could overcome his desires, and of course it's wrong to commit a sin, and of course there's consequences to sin. But there's a difference between heresy. Heresy is almost, it's not an unforgivable sin, but it's a sin in which one can almost not repent of, only because if someone doesn't believe that they're doing something wrong, what gives them any impetus to ask. I've often seen it been said that's the difference. You have the more traditional Jewish cultures, the Sephardic cultures, and some of the other, I see among the Ashkenazim, there's the Carpathian cultures and so forth, where the Jews are very traditional, even if some of them, they don't always live up to, the less pious people, they don't always live up to what they are supposed to do, but they recognize, it comes to Yom Kippur or something, they have to repent. They can't just say everything's okay, whereas you have the heresy of the Reform of saying, oh, it's okay, you do whatever you want. No. At least from the Torah perspective. But to abuse people with these labels, to make them feel that there's no hope because they're stuck with this label, because if they've committed a particular sin, or maybe they haven't committed a sin, but they desire to do a sin, and they think that there's no hope for them. That's not true. There's always hope. And when people are labeled with these things, they start to lose hope. And we cannot lose hope, and there are bona fide sexual minorities like eunuchs and so forth, and the Navi says that the eunuch could have a yad v'shem tov mibanim mibanos, right? If he keeps Shabbos and does everything, he could have a memory and a heritage and a good name better than having biological children. He keeps Shabbos, he keeps the mitzvahs, right? He keeps the Sabbath, he keeps the commandments. So we have to find that balance. We can't just go and say that everything is hopeless. That's the way that these communities try to brainwash people into thinking this is what they are instead of what they do. And so that's what our and like I said, our sages sought to prevent people from developing these proclivities because they're so destructive, and also they're prohibited. And trying to protect society, and we see here what they call the grooming, to try to destroy the society. And really the purpose of that is to lead the children against their parents and to push a communist agenda. That's what really all this is all about. So we have to be very careful, because we're seeing the people who call themselves progressives are really regressive. They're really trying to turn the world into an antediluvian pagan mess. And there is an idea of the ethical heathen, the ethical pagan. It could be Chasidei Umas Olam even in the most pagan religions. The problem is the people who don't have the piety. Of course, the pagan religions are wrong, and idolatry is wrong. But nonetheless, the attacks on the society are much more dangerous. So we have to find a way, in a friendly way, to educate people that hope is not lost. And there are ways to live in a Torah lifestyle, even that's not the most ideal sometimes, to try one's best. I think that's the best answer I could give right now. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. We'll see you later.